In this video, we will build an animated button with the new iOS 18 MeshGradient API. So stay tuned for that and subscribe to the channel to learn more about iOS development. Alright, so we'll get started with this super simple setup where we just have a button with an empty action because we don't care about that in this video. The important thing is that we define our label with this closure syntax, so we can't use the text label that is also available as an initializer. So instead we will create our own label, and of course we're starting with the text, but there's much more we need to do. So we'll get started by defining a font so it's nice and readable, and I always like to use the headline font. And then we'll add some padding so our button has some spacing between the text and the border that we're going to animate in a second. And speaking of that, we will make sure that we add a frame with a max width of .infinity, so the button will definitely always scale up to the entire width of its containing view. We'll also give this button a foreground style of white, and this will probably hide it for now, but we will make sure that the background is black in just a second. So let's do that by defining a background of .black. And just like that, the text is back there. And let's also add some, I actually already added some padding to the entire button. So I won't do that inside of the label because I want the padding to be to the left and to the right, and also top and bottom of the button, of course, but I don't want the user to be able to click in there. So the padding should definitely be outside of the button and not inside of the button. Let's also make sure that this has a nice corner radius, so we'll add a clip shape modifier and we'll use the new .rect syntax with a corner radius of 16. So this is probably a good corner radius. Of course, you can play around with this number and all of the other numbers in this video as much as you'd like, and whatever works with your view and your app's aesthetic. Alright, so how does all of this MeshGradient stuff now work? I have a dedicated video on that, so you can watch that up there if you're interested in it and if this video doesn't go in deep enough for you. But what we will do is create a second background modifier. Now the order here is relevant because we want 3 views basically. So we want black, then in front of that we want our MeshGradient as a stroke, and then before or in front of that we want our button text, which is tap me. So that's the inverse order that we will have to specify. So we start with our text and then we say the background of the text is the MeshGradient stroke and the background of the MeshGradient stroke is the black color, which means that we need to add our stroke before the black background. So how will we create this stroke? I like to create a rounded rectangle with the corner radius that we used below as well. So all of this matches, and by default this will of course be blue. So you can see this already is exactly the corner radius and size that we wanted. And then all we have to do is use the stroke modifier on this shape. And we will use the one with content and line width. So the content will be its own line here, and the line width you can of course play around with this. In my example, I'm just going to use a line width of 5. And we could start by using a red stroke, and then you will notice that this is just a red line with a width of 5 points. But of course, we're not going to settle with just a color. We will create and implement a mesh gradient here. Mesh gradients have a bunch of different initializers, and we're going to use the one where you define a width, a height, an array of points along which the colors are then aligned. So that means that width times height should be the size of this points array, which should be equal to the size of this colors array. So in our example, we're going to use a width and a height of 3, so a 3 by 3 matrix. And let's also make sure this is properly indented and laid out here so you can easily read the code. And then we will create this array of points, and the array of colors we will handle in just a second because I would actually like to have that extracted out of the view into its own little property here. So I'm just going to create these points, and they are actually pretty simple. So we will get started with 0, 0, and then let me copy that. Next one will be 0.5. So we're going to create the first row, then the second row, and then the third row. And the last one, and my autocomplete here is pretty helpful already, will be at x1. And then we can just, duplicate this row twice. So this will be at y0.5. So this will be the center row for all three of these values. And the last one will be the bottom row where the y value is 1. Once again, if you want to learn more about mesh gradients, you can watch the video that I linked up there in the info card. So with that, we have our points array set up. So let's now worry about our colors array. And of course, we could create 9 colors in here and have them static. But I actually like to have that created in a slightly different fashion. So we will instead create a state or a variable, not necessarily a state. And I will just call it colors for now. And I'm using a trick here where I create a random array or an array that has 3 different colors in a random permutation. So for that, I like to create a range with the size that our array should have. So this one should be 0.9 or 0 to 8 basically. And if we command click on here or option click on here, you will see that this isn't an array, this is actually a range of integers. So what we can now do is map this range to something else, and we don't care about our parameter here. So instead of that, we will create or define the colors that we will use. So we will use green, blue, and cyan. So let's see where cyan is, it's right here. And then we will pick a random element from this collection, and I am going to force unwrap this because I know that this collection is never empty because we defined it statically. So it is safe to force unwrap this. And now if we option click on colors, you can see it's now an array of color, and this means that it's 9 random entries from this array. So this is a very neat trick, and you can keep that in mind for many different applications. Now we can use this colors array here in our mesh gradient definition. And now you can already see that we have some randomly distributed shades of green, blue, and cyan as the stroke of this button. Now this is already pretty good, but we actually also want an animation. So in order for the animation to work, we will create a second color array, and I'll call them colors1 and colors2. And just for demonstration purposes, I will change this to red, blue, and orange. And then let's also introduce an add state private var is animating, and I will set this to false by default. And then in our mesh gradient definition, we can say if it is animating, we want to use colors1, and else we want to use colors2. And of course, this should be a question mark here. Now, where do we start this animation? We can do it either inside of our label or outside of the button. I think it makes sense to have it inside of the button because that's where the animation is used. So as always, we'll create an onAppear here. And in the onAppear, we'll use the with animation closure. And we will actually use this one where we can pass an explicit animation. So let's first of all set is animating to true, or let's just toggle it. That's the safest option. Then in here, the animation that we want is an ease in out with a duration of whatever duration you'd like. So I've played around with this a bit, and I think that 2 is pretty good because that way you can actually see the animation taking place. And then let's also make sure that this never stops. So we'll chain the repeat forever animation here. So I don't really know if this is called a modifier or an animation. Turns out it's an animation. Okay, so now you can see that this animation or this button gradient always swaps between red and green. And of course, if we stop and resume the preview, you will notice that the color arrangement in the stroke will slightly change every single time because we did choose this random approach here. Now, of course, you have your entire creative freedom, so you could statically create these two color arrays, or you could change the method in which you animate, where, for example, your points change or your colors are being rotated, so they just rotate around the button. Of course, you could also just choose a completely different approach where you don't use a rounded rectangle, but just a mesh gradient, and then you use the rotation modifier where you rotate it. So there are many different options on how to implement this. This is just a pretty simple way to do it for now. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, make sure to subscribe to the channel for even more SwiftUI tips and tricks.